In 1856, a landscape architect traveled a steamboat down the Cane River in Louisiana. Along the way, the boat stopped at several plantations to take on cotton. He noted a well-settled and cultivated country for the 15 miles along the river, and there was, among those he encountered, quote, only one pure-blooded white man. The traveler described the farm owners as Gaelic and Hispano-Afric Creoles, and suggested they were the descendants of old French or Spanish planters and their Negro slaves. Categorizing people based on their racial and ethnic heritage is a problem. People who are victims of genocide, displaced, enslaved, or subjugated are denied connections to their families, their cultures, and their histories. It is not typically people themselves who get to declare their identity, but institutions and people in power who include and exclude groups of people to serve their interests. Black wealth has consistently been achieved in the United States, and it has repeatedly been destroyed. It is achieved because talent and capacity is equally distributed among groups of people, and anyone will thrive in an advantageous system. It is destroyed because wealth and property are proximate to power, and black wealth threatens white power structures. Where the definition of black might be redefined to serve a power structure, the definition of wealth always remains property, home ownership, and land. When groups of people emerge with power that is parallel and threatening to established power, the forces of the state and its institutions use violence and oppression to deny agency and destroy organization with counterinsurgency. The Cherokee Outlet, also known as the Cherokee Strip Land Run of 1893, was a mass effort by the U.S. government to quickly occupy and colonize a large area of the country following the forced removal and displacement of the Cherokee Nation. Outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and positioning around the new mid-continent oil fields, posturing with the likes of Getty and Sinclair, people and settlements were forming around the new occupiers of the land and their capital. The Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa began as one of those settlements. It was started by a group of black investors in 1905, among whom was Ottawa Gurley, himself born to formerly enslaved persons. Among the people displaced with the Cherokee Nation from roughly 1830 to 1850 were black slaves, and in Greenwood, Gurley and his peers were creating a place where migrating black people from the east and displaced black people in the west could inhabit together and create a thriving community with public policies, education, businesses, and services that created rare opportunity and mobility for black people. This Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma is known as Black Wall Street, and by June of 1921 it would be completely destroyed along with the black wealth that created it. The massacre in Greenwood cannot be understated, a publicly endorsed militaristic strike on an entire community which left 35 city blocks destroyed in flames, 300 people dead, and 800 more injured. Leveled in a day was all the progress that thousands of community members in Greenwood had achieved together. 1964 brought the end of legalized segregation, known elsewhere as apartheid, and de facto segregation grew in its place, where the Jim Crow laws of post-Reconstruction created policy which made clear how people should be kept separate De facto segregation is less obvious. Children, for example, are no longer in separate schools as a matter of policy, but because all the white people made sure to keep the black children out of their neighborhoods and out of their schools with other methods. Wealth and property was still limited to white people, along with access to power and agency, using popular practices like redlining and discrimination in hiring. Sworn testimony from former Wells Fargo employees alleged that the bank deliberately tricked middle-class black families they called mud people into subprime ghetto loans. Home ownership is not just denied to black families in this instance, but it is actually used as a weapon against them, one that forces them into loans from banks which are designed to fail, especially during crisis. This is one systematic way that institutions are used to keep groups of people marginalized and force their vulnerability. All groups of people are equally talented and capable of thriving with support. Privilege and power, not capacity or ability, is what allows people to succeed in a capitalist system. This is structural racism, and it is used to control structural mobility. When the Great Recession hit, the impact was on families whose loans from the banks were the worst, the ones described earlier from Wells Fargo. Between 2007 and 2016, the wealthiest 10% of white families saw their wealth increase by at least $1.2 million. The top 10% of black families gained only $78,000. These were the best positioned homeowners to face foreclosure. After the crisis, black homeowners with negative equity rose from 0.7% to 14.2%, reaching just 4% at the same time for white families. The U.S. government issued $75 billion in mortgage relief through the TARP bailout, the economic objective being to eliminate as much bad housing debt as possible. Instead, the results were massive fraud and inside gains by the financial giants like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, more predation, and new bondage in the form of debt. Wealth and property has to accumulate in different places to keep healthy the myth of an open class system in the United States. But what we have in actuality is structured mobility. As black and deviant are redefined to serve class control, wealth and private property are not. We have also seen an evolution in the way that violence and oppression is brought onto people who cross social lines which threaten hegemonic power. White-collar attacks now come in the form of ghetto loans, gerrymandered school districts, and mandatory minimum sentences, while the state and its authorities still maintain a monopoly on violence and grow in their capability to oppress people and destroy communities. Black wealth is consistently recreated in the U.S. because all groups are equally talented and capable, and black wealth is repeatedly destroyed in the U.S. because it threatened established white power structures.